Hey, Michelle. Good to see
Hey,
you.
you too, Mel. We just snuck in any time there. Hi to you and hi to everyone who's online right now.
Yes, thanks for joining us tonight or your morning, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yes. It's this is International Women of Mystery. We are so to everyone all around the world, wherever you are, welcome. Or for people in my neck of the woods, Wominjeka. And I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I am today. So I'm in Naarm, which is Melbourne in Australia, and I want to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, who of course are the traditional custodians of this land. And one of the things that I am proud of in Australia is that I live and learn and work and play amongst people from the oldest living culture in human history. So really want to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and people from First Nations cultures all around the world.
Mm. Thank you so much for that, Michelle. So it's been a while since we've done a live, and this one is different than what we've been doing. This one we've got a real presentation for you, a real set of actionable information. What are we here to talk about tonight, and why?
Well, we're here to talk about, I guess the slide on the screen says it all, how to close the workplace gender gap. And we're here to talk about, well, let me click over and tell you what we're going to talk about. I want to talk about where we are now in terms of the workplace gender gap. Now, the gender gap gets talked about in a whole bunch of different scenarios, but for you and I, Mel, what we do is really focus on workplaces and how workplaces and workplace leaders can create and sustain outstanding cultures for women and other underrepresented people. So want to talk about that, the gender gap in that context. And part of that is setting it up by saying, well, where are we now? Then what causes where are we now, i.e. the gender gap? And then, as you've quite rightly said, what are we going to do about it? Because there's a lot of looking at the problem. You and I are very much about let's get stuff done, conversation to action. Well, what are the actionable insights that people can take out today?
Excellent. Okay, so we want to start with where are we now? Michelle, help us understand the landscape or perhaps the playing field of what it's like for men and women at work.
Well, I did a graphic. Well, I didn't, but artificial intelligence did it for me. So and I was inspired by someone I work with, Ben Pawson of Spackle Media. He and I are doing some work on my next sport, Advancing Women in Sport report, and he suggested this kind of graphic. And I went, this is a really good way of describing the playing field for women in workplaces. And when, I talk to women and all people, this graphic won't be a news flash, right? This is the playing field for men and women. And of course, this graphic illustrates just how even it is. And many women say, particularly when they hear things like, oh, I think things are so much better at work now. Isn't it great? Blah, blah, blah. They go, yeah, but this is what I'm still experiencing. This is how I feel, this side of the equation. We know that the global leadership gender gap has got to be closed. We know that women must be given the same career and earning opportunities and success as men. And we know that because, women comprise more than half of the world's population and roughly 42% of all paid working people. I'm always conscious to say paid, Mel, because there's a lot of women doing a lot of unpaid work in the world. In fact, 75% of the unpaid labour in the world is still done by women. But this uneven playing field translates into women having lower workforce participation rates than men. And they have higher unemployment rates than men. They more often experience substandard working conditions than men, and a lot of that's to do with precarious types of employment that we see many women in. And of course, women only hold a fraction of the leadership positions around the world. So as I said, Mel, I don't want to just kind of shake my fist at the sky today. I want to, first of all, start where are we now? This is where we are now. But what are we going to do about this very uneven playing field? And I figured that one of the best ways to do that is represent the leadership gap around the world. And really, the current state is still pretty well. The progress has been glacial, and there has been progress, no doubt. But the higher up the corporate ladder, which is what this graphic provides an indication of, the higher up the ladder, the fewer that women are. And, I guess we look at the numbers on this screen and say, well, there's, 47% of non-managers are women, 37%, 29%, so on and so forth. But the flip side of that is that if you look at that blue part of the graphic, that's how men dominate. And this is the leadership gender gap, which has enormous consequences.
Right. And Michelle, you and I have pulled and presented in various places that the numbers look very similar in Australia. They look very similar in the US. And for some rungs here are perhaps even worse in one place or the other. So clearly there's more work to do. Help us understand what the consequences are for women of this leadership gap.
Well, one of the things that really, I guess, worries me a lot is that women won't reach. They do not, in fact, they do not reach their full economic potential around the world right now. So in OECD countries, the gender gap or the gender wage gap in 2021 was 11.9%. Now, that is starting to close. And here in my home country of Australia, we have seen good progress. If you look at the whole reporting period, so over the last 10 years, we've seen good progress in the wages gap contracting. However, there's still large variation between countries, between sectors, which means there's still a lot of work to do. Why does that gender pay gap exist? And folks, I'm talking about the average of all men's wages versus the average of all women's wages, not the gender as in unequal pay, i.e. myself and my male colleague are doing the same role for different pay, different thing. But again, the gender gap exacerbates the wage gap because of gender segregation in jobs. Leadership is one way of looking at masculinized and feminized industries. So here in Australia, we've got mining, manufacturing and construction dominated by men. 80% of the workforce is by men, highest wages by far. Whereas we look at the feminized industries, the caring industries, teaching, childcare, healthcare workers, and we see those feminised industries with the lowest wages. We also know that caregiving responsibilities still fall heavily to women, which precludes them from fully participating in the workforce. And we see other things like a lack of pay transparency and discrimination and so forth. But what does that all mean? It actually means that women have less money for their future. And in 2022, in America, the 401k, so the pension fund contributions for women, were 43% less than men. And that results in an overall 65% lower account balance, so less money to retire on. Here in Australia, we know that the women, depending on their age, the variation in their current prediction around their current retirement income varies between 19% to 42% less than men. And that comes from our own Workplace Gender Equality Agency reporting. So what it means by closing the leadership gender gap, i.e. making sure that more women participate in more senior roles with higher paying wages, means that we can close the wages gap. And there are estimates that could equate to an additional $1.6 million in retirement income for women. So that's economic well-being is a really big factor in this, Mel, in terms of consequences.
100%. And, this is more about just more than just about spending power. This is about your ability to take care of yourself and have what you need during those retirement years. So thank you
Absolutely.
for explaining that, Michelle.
Well, and here in Australia, and in some other regions, women in my age bracket, so women over 55, are the fastest growing group of homeless people. Um, and that is because of the gender gap, the gender pay gap. So many factors lead to that. But this is, we're seeing women retiring into poverty, or having to work longer than they actually want to because they cannot afford to not work. So I guess that's a good segue in understanding why does this occur, and then, of course, what can we do about it? And right now, I really want to talk to managers, executives, leaders in organisations, because we have to know what the cause is so that we can address it. And I think what makes me a little bit mad and very sad, and also frustrated, is that there is still a lot of talk about the problem. And there's a little bit of talk about the benefits of a gender balanced workforce. In fact, but still a lot of talk about this zero sum game: when women win, men lose, which of course is a complete myth. But I really want to get us into concrete action. And I remember a woman at a workshop, it was many years ago now, 6 or 7 years ago, because I've been at this game for a while. She just said to me, "You know what, Michelle, this business of gender inequality is a very well-polished problem." So the truth is, I don't want to talk about the problem anymore or too much more. I want to talk about why it happens, and then what can we do about it? And so that means we actually have to understand the three main causes of the gender gap. Closing the gender gap means that we really have to look at talent and workplace again, look at all of those of us who have talent management responsibility, i.e. people, managers, executives, HR folks, talent. If we're managing people, we're managing talent. So there's three levels here. First of all, there are systems, and what I call the system. And in the context of workplaces, these are our corporate policies and practices, or the lack of them, that can adversely affect women's advancement into those higher paying or those more senior roles, or roles with more influence and authority. And so when we look at your talent management program, succession planning, hiring, in fact, the entire employee life cycle, unless a gender lens has been applied to that system, it may well be inadvertently holding women back. So that's number one. And often when I talk to my clients, when I start an engagement, there'll be some talk about we have to update the policy and what have you. And yes, that's necessary, but it's not the complete picture. The second part, which is incredibly important, is managers, or specifically managers' mindsets. When we talk about managers, we're talking about managers of all genders here too. And what we want to say is that unexamined mindsets about women, work, careers, and leadership can potentially mean that managers are making decisions consciously and unconsciously that are biased. And I'm going to go into what some of those decisions look like in a little while, but we must look at all of our managers and say, are our managers inadvertently, because of their lack of 21st century DEI skills, are they inadvertently derailing our talent pipeline of women? And then the third area is women themselves. Now, this is not a fixing women webinar, because I don't do that. Anyone who knows me knows that. But women must have the right skill sets, so critical skill sets required for advancement into senior and executive roles. And we know that from our research and the research of our colleague Susan Colantuno, which is now coming up for nearly 25 years of research, and we've got massive longitudinal research, we know that women are still not being exposed early enough and often enough to the concepts of building these critical skills. And then, of course, the second part is demonstrating them. So that's the three reasons, Mel.
That's great. So there's obviously a lot of myths out there, but these are the core reasons that we have found over those years of research started by Susan as to why this is happening. So, after the why, help us understand what are some of the steps that leaders and people managers can take. What can we do about this?
Yep. So let's get the GSD section going. Get stuff done. I won't swear today. The first thing, so when we think about corporate systems, we know that inclusion, a lot of people bandy the term inclusive leader or inclusive workplace around, but we actually have to create more inclusive workplaces that support women's advancement. That means that we have to develop a gender equity strategy that includes building DEI accountability and skill sets in leaders. So that's the minimum level of action required. And what I want to say around that is that remember I said in terms of policies and practices that perhaps they weren't quite right or they're missing. I would say that any organisation that doesn't have or neglects to have a meaningful DEI strategy and implementation plan is setting themselves up for, well, not only failure in a whole bunch of other respects, and I can talk about the business case for gender equality till the cows come home, but they are really holding back closing their gender gap. And it manifests in statements like, well, there's really no budget for DEI, or we've got other business priorities at the moment. This is, there's no burning platform, Michelle. We don't have a problem here because look at how many women we've employed. Or actually our ERG, our employee resource group, will take care of that. So we really want leaders at the very, very start to say, do we have a robust gender equity plan? Do we have the ability to implement that plan with the right people, the right resources, and the right mindsets? So, and things that are going to really help accelerate closing the leadership gender gap in organisations is looking at recruitment. So looking at the entire life cycle. So look at it through a DEI lens, diversity, equity and inclusion. Look at it through a gender equity lens. Look at performance evaluations. We know and we hear, particularly in our Lead to Soar network, about the perceived, real or otherwise, if you're perceiving it, it's real to you, ways that women are evaluated when it comes to performance. Many are still evaluated on their personality rather than their performance. So making sure that we have really transparent performance evaluation. Career and talent management pathways. Mel and I have just recorded our podcast around the importance of having a real career mobility plan inside the organisation and helping managers know what that plan is and be able to implement it. We must support working families. And this is not just women. And as I said, 75% of the world's labour, unpaid labour, is still done by women. We want people to share the care. So whether it's caring for small humans, older humans, furry people, little furry friends, whatever it may be, those caring responsibilities that families have and the obligations that families have is super important to create a family-friendly workplace. And of course, at the bottom line is we need to hold leaders accountable for closing the leadership gender gap, which means we need great metrics and we need leadership accountability. So measurable goals, accountability mechanisms, and regular focus on continuous improvement. So that's number one in terms of corporate. In terms of the managers' mindsets, this is an enormous area, opportunity area. So as I said earlier, managers make hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of decisions every week about talent, i.e. about people. When we hire people, who we promote, who we send on the secondment to the cross-functional team, whatever it may be, when we look at our succession planning, who we coach, when we coach, how we coach, and of course the development opportunities. And those decisions are all, the decisions we make in the moment, so subconsciously, are all going to be informed by our mindsets about women, work, leadership and power. And if we have never examined our mindsets about women, the role of women in society, we might just be acting in ways that hinder women. And this is not just about men and women. It is about all genders and our mindsets about women. So I want to explain about that. Unexamined mindsets mean that a manager may not have ever examined their belief about the way women should be in society. And that may mean that they're inadvertently devaluing women's contributions. So we want managers to prioritise actively including and supporting all team members, of course, but especially women, and helping them belong. That means that those women, when we feel like we belong, we're more likely to stay and we're more likely to be productive. The second part is that managers who are more skilled in inclusive leadership skills are more likely to support women and other marginalised people to reach their full potential. And that means that they're going to prioritise and tailor and tweak their coaching, their training, their mentoring and their sponsorship to make sure those people, women and others, are advancing at the same rate as our male colleagues. And then the third part is a lack of accountability for women's advancement. Yes, this is a crossover from the organisational or the corporate systems piece, but I want managers to take accountability. Yes, be given accountability by the organisation to advance women, but I want them to take personal leadership accountability and hold themselves accountable just the same as they would for any other business success measure. And you know, the old saying here, Mel, is what gets measured gets managed. So if I know that I'm holding myself accountable to make sure that women are advancing and reaching their full potential at the same rate as men, guess what? I'm going to focus on it. And then the final area is around women's skills. And as a leader, we are integral to the success of the organisation. And for leaders, all leaders, it means having and being known for having critical skill sets of BQ, EQ and SQ. We're not going to go into detail about the BQ, EQ, SQ, which is the Advancing Women Formula, but it's in my book, The Leadership Compass. There's an unashamed plug there. But the critical skill sets here are particularly around business intelligence. Business intelligence, BQ, means having and being known for having business, strategic and financial acumen and an orientation for success. It means that she's skilled. We know she's skilled and she's ambitious for herself, her team and the organisation. But BQ is often the missing link for women. And what I want to do is now take you through the three ways that BQ might not be showing up either for her or in the organisation. So number one, three ways BQ may not be showing up. In the skills. So we know that business, strategic and financial acumen and a success orientation, they are a skill set, just like any other skill set. They can be learned. Those competencies can be learned with discipline practice, can be mastered. So all of us, regardless of who we are in organisations, that is an essential part of the leadership equation. So we must attain those skills. So that's number one. So for the women on the call and managers of women on the call, let's evaluate, does she have those essential, those critical skill sets? Number one. Number two, is she adequately demonstrating that she's got those skills? So for the women on the call, what's the perception of you as a BQ leader? Are you known as a businesswoman with business, strategic and financial acumen and an outcome or a success orientation? So that's number two. And there are many, many ways of doing this. And we have met hundreds of women who are extraordinarily skilled, but the perception of them is not. Now, that perception may be in the way that they're showing up, the way their language they're using, what have you. Or it could be she hasn't had the opportunity to demonstrate because the system, so managers haven't been putting her into the environment where she can adequately demonstrate. And then the third one, which is, well, they're all compelling, but this is really compelling. The third one is in the career advice given to women. 97% of career advice given to women does not overtly point out the importance of having and being known for having BQ skills. In fact, and I have Again, lots and lots of research, and we run continual longitudinal research on this. I surveyed a group of 50 women last year in one of my client organisations, ASX listed company, middle management, aspiring to senior and executive management. I asked them, what's the best career advice you've ever received? 98% of those women, so slightly more than the average, told me that their best career advice had nothing to do with building and demonstrating their BQ skills. And that response is consistent with every other program or workshop that Mel, Susan, and I have run for the last 20 years. So that is not changing. So we must change the advice we're giving to women. And when I say advice, I mean a whole bunch of things. Their coaching, their training, their courses, their mentoring, their books, their conferences that they go to. Why is this important? It's important because as you move through middle management to senior management to executive management, by the way, that is the hardest transition where we see the widest leadership gender gap. As you move through those, between 58 and 80% of the skills and competencies expected in those roles relate to BQ, relate to business, strategic and financial acumen. About 31% relates to EQ, about 12% to SQ. Yet 97, 98% of women are not being told how important this is. So this is one of the reasons why women remain what we call mired in the middle, stuck in middle management. So we must address that. So that's the three areas, Mel, and what's going on. But I guess, can I anticipate your next question?
Yes, absolutely. So we are ready to move forward. We want to move from conversation to action. And I think that we can talk about this in the context of a question that came up earlier. So we were asked, basically, do you have a course to prepare or develop consultants on this topic? This actually came up when you were speaking about managers' mindsets. So Michelle, maybe you could answer this in the context, especially of how individual women and companies can work with Lead to Soar, and on the front
Beautiful.
of both, training women, but also working with managers and leaders.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad. Thank you for the question. And the first thing is, let's start fixing the system, because we do not need to fix women, but we all have a role to play here. So number one, let's start fixing the system. What does that mean at a corporate level? It means that if you are a CEO, an HR director, an executive general manager, someone who is in charge, you are the stewards or the governors of the business, I want you to do this. Diagnose, where are we now? What is our leadership gender gap? Define, where do we need to be, and how do we set goals to get there? Then design a blueprint for how to move forward, and then deliver the capability and capacity to implement that strategy. That's where, well, this is a real sweet spot for us. I mean, they're all sweet spots for us, Mel, but the ability to be able to understand where we are now is hugely important. The diagnostic, which can come in all sorts of different ways, is an important way. I often say to our clients, please don't spend a cent, do anything until you understand where you are right now. And that diagnostic means, yes, what are the numbers, but also what's the lived experience of women in your organisation. Then let's work out where we want to be, work out what the gap is, design how we're going to close that gap, and then really build the capability and the capacity of everyone in our organisation, not just the DEI coordinator, not just the HR department, but everyone in the organisation to deliver so that we can close that gap. The second part is hugely important around managers. So for managers on the call, I want you to understand what your current mindset is about women in leadership. What do I really believe? Deep down, like, you don't have to tell anyone out loud, but really think, what are my expectations about the way women behave, the way they show up, about leadership, about power, about their careers, about who does the work at home, so on and so forth. I want you to embrace a growth mindset as well. For many people I talk to, when we start this work, when we start our engagements with organisations, I say, don't be guilty. just you've started. So this is the main thing. But understand that as humans, we have enormous capacity to learn and to grow and to master new skills. This is a skill set. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I wasn't taught how to do that when I started work in 1980s, but I've learned it, and now I'm teaching other people. So embrace a growth mindset. I know you might not know it all now. In fact, none of us do, but say, I can learn and I can get good at this. Please get curious. Don't assume you know what the lived experience is of women. You do not. So please go and ask women. Really listen to women in your organisation, and that's where the managers and the diagnostic match all go hand in hand. But most importantly, as I said earlier in the call, please hold yourself accountable. If every manager in the world did one thing, one inclusive thing every day in their workplace, we'd have very, very different workplaces. So that's what I want systems, so the corporate folks and managers to do. And then finally, invest in women's continuing professional development. Whether you're a woman yourself or you're a manager or a workplace that employs women, we must invest in their continuous professional development. No more fluffy stuff, please. We're already very good at being team players and all that kind of stuff. Please invest in developing our business, strategic and financial acumen. Teach us how to run businesses. Teach us how to be CEOs. One of the things that we often say is we're trying to get the next generation of women CEOs ready to lead. As a woman, what I want you to do are these 5 things. I want you to embrace your identity as a leader. I am a leader, and leadership manifests itself at every level in every organisation. Sure, it's different, but the mindset of a leader, the mindset of a winner is really important. Identify your own gaps. What are my skill gaps? What are my perception gaps? What do I do about that? And of course, look at your career advice. Am I getting the right career advice? Start shaping those conversations. For those of you already there, I want you to reach down and grab as many women, scoop them up and bring them with you. As Mel often says, a rising tide lifts all boats. And finally, another unashamed plug for women here in Melbourne or women in Australia, come and attend the Lead to Soar Summit, because you're going to get this over 2 days and much, much more. So that's the 3 things that we can do, Mel.
Brilliant. Okay, let me just recap a little bit quickly here. So, if you are an organizational leader looking for support, Lead to Soar can come in and help you with closing your leadership gender gap. And we do that in 2 big ways. So, one part of what we do is working directly with women, providing training for women, working with cohorts of women to develop these critical skills. And then the other area we work on is directly with executive leaders and building up their inclusive leadership skill set. So, 2 big ways that we work with folks in organizations. And then for individual women, yes, we have the Lead to Soar virtual network that you can join. We have all kinds of learning opportunities inside there, and it's super easy to find at leadtosoar.com. Now, whether you are an organizational leader or an individual woman, you can attend and send groups of women to attend the Lead to Soar Summit. Now, Michelle, I'm going to ask you to tell us more about what people can expect from the Lead to Soar Summit. Before I do, let me just quickly say to the listeners, thank you for joining. We've got one question in the chat that I'm going to come back to at the end. So if you have any final questions for us, do drop them in the chat and we'll cover them at the end. Okay, so Michelle, last bits here. What can folks expect to get from the Lead to Soar Summit?
Well, what they can expect is, well, they'll have me for 2 days. So I'll be hosting and emceeing the event, plus running a number of our signature workshops. There will be a panel of C-suite women. So we have 5 women, pardon me, CEOs and C-suite executives who I'll be talking to about, well, their journey to the C-suite, but importantly, giving advice and answering women's questions about what does it really take to be on the C-suite. We've got 3 extraordinary keynote speakers. Rihanna Brown, who is an academically trained futurist who's going to teach us about the importance of strategic foresight, strategic thinking, strategic doing as leaders. We've got Kate Dillon, who is the founder of Walk Fearlessly. I do have an unashamed plug on. I've got one of her bits of merch on today, Walk Fearlessly. Kate's going to talk to us really about our brand as women leaders and what we need to do to really speak up in organisations and I guess stand out in all the right ways. And there's a formula around it. So she's very, very good at brand, at personal
Kate's incredible.
Brand. People think I'm high energy. Kate is off the charts energy. And then we've got someone that I've worked with and known for a long time now, Charlotte Blair. Charlotte Blair is one of the world's best Gallup strengths coaches. In fact, she's a coach of coaches now. So Gallup brings Charlotte over to their main conference in the US every year to speak. She's the author of Career Unstuck, and she's going to teach us how we can get our careers unstuck, but also really, really ramp up our leadership journey by understanding our strengths. There's a lot going on in it, but what I really think that you and I are very thoughtful about, Mel, is we give women working time, reflection and working time in our conference, in our summit, so that they can stop, breathe, reflect and create action plans to take back to the workplace to become more effective leaders. So that's it.
Love it. Okay. Let's go through a couple things really quick here. Roman says, thanks for a great forum, essential conversation and action, some great disruption. And
hi, Roman, and thank you, because Roman's one of the amazing practitioners here in Australia. That's a big tick from me. Thanks, Roman.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I've got a copy of Michelle's book here, The Leadership Compass. This is definitely worth picking up. Okay, and then a question. What's in the middle of middle management level and executive level?
What's in the middle of middle management level and exec? Oh, okay, right. So interesting. I have, normally when I go, this is a very high level deck that I've taken you all through. What I normally do is go through some of those layers. Now, it's going to be different between organisations, but women in middle management, typically we talk about your first rung into management is as a supervisor or a leader of people doing the work. Then you become a leader of leaders. So you're leading people leaders who are leading the people who do work. Then you become a leader of a part of the organisation, so on and so forth. So I hope that's answered the question, but I guess what I want to say is the higher you go, and I'm talking a little bit hierarchically here, but the more senior you become in an organisation, one of the things that I learned from Susan is you actually have to let go of doing some stuff that you did in early management. You have to let go of some stuff that you were doing in middle management, and you have to start doing some different stuff. And one way of looking at that, which is why I talk about SQ, so social intelligence, is the ability to look externally rather than just internally. And it's a real mindset and skill set shift for people moving from middle to senior to executive. I hope, Rosalind, that answers your question. So if you look in my book, The Leadership Compass, every chapter I provide advice for women and their organisations about what you can do at each layer of management.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'll just add a little bit on top of that. I've got this visual that I like to use sort of the staircase or of the career ladder, if you will. And I like to point out that when you start early in your career, you're very inwardly focused because your responsibility is to be an individual contributor. So life is really about your work that's right in front of you and bringing that contribution to the table. And every step you take upward your view and your relationships have to look further and further outward. So in middle management, you're looking at your team members, trying to help them grow and move along. And then the steps after that become more outward still. So it widens within the organization. But then things like client relationships become important, perhaps working with regulators. And later on, still perhaps working with other stakeholders like investors.
Mm.
So the responsibilities, of course, change. You definitely have to learn to delegate, and the importance of having a strategic network grows immensely as you grow in your career. And I don't know if we'll just add a last bit to that on, Michelle, the research of what bosses see as women's strengths. Typically, they see women as being uh, better than their male counterparts when it comes to things related to relationships and interpersonal skills and communication. But where that breaks down is when it comes to having, maintaining, and leveraging strategic relationships. So maybe that's a good thing to wrap up on here, Michelle. How do you explain strategic networking and what that means and the importance of it in a senior and executive levels career?
Well, one of my favourite taglines is that networking is working, and it absolutely is, and you've just explained why. And the importance of strategic networking. Networking's not going to 100 coffees and having 500 million comments on LinkedIn and what have you. Strategic networking is about saying, what are my goals for myself, my team, and my organisation, and how am I using my strategic network, i.e. the network that's aligned with that goal, to achieve those goals. It's a really efficient way of networking. It is an essential business tool, and it does mean that we do have to, as women, and I can absolutely put my hand up as a reformed person who did this, instead of having our head down and our bum up doing really great work, we're saying, how do I lift my head and look out and say, who can help me get the job done? Or conversely, because networking is about generosity and reciprocity, who can I help get the job done, both internally and externally to the organisation? So your network and your networking is strategic when it's aligned with your goals.
Love it. All right. Thank you so much, Michelle. This has been a lot of fun. And listeners, thank you for joining us. Visit leadtosoar.com, and we hope to see you or your team members at the Lead to Soar Summit.
Absolutely. And I'll leave you with the words of Hillary Clinton. Let's not talk about American politics right now, but Hillary, one of her famous quotes is, women are the largest untapped reservoir of talent in the world, and they are. So talk to us about tapping that untapped reservoir of talent and helping every woman in your organisation reach their full potential. Thanks, folks.
Brilliant. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.